Welcome once again to our YouTube channel. As we continue with social and political theory, today we are going to discuss Achille Mbembe and necropolitics. So, our learning objectives for this particular topic we're treating today is we're seeking to explain Mbembe's concept of necropolitics, distinguish between that of biopower from Foucault and then necropolitics by Mbembe. We're doing that because he borrowed his or he actually learned or was influenced by Foucault's biopower. So we have to look at that also and identify how sovereignty operates through the death world and then applies Mbembe's ideas to Africa and the global context as a whole. So you see a picture of the intellectual scholar himself, Achille Mbembe. So on my left side, you see Mbembe, a Cameroonian philosopher and then a political theorist, which will go and then we'll delve in, who is currently a teacher in what university in South Africa. And then on my top right corner, you see a poster that shows his global public what intellect and influence on public intellectual arguments or debates he goes around or when he's been invited. So you see that he's giving a lot of lectures around the world, influence philosophy, politics, and then post-colonial what studies. Yeah, so he's become more like an African thinker, but a global what voice on decolonization, power, and then what, and then race. And you see that of his some of his books, which is Necropolitics, Achille Mbembe, and then Critique of Black Reasoning, Achille Mbembe. So we're going to look at, as we always do, we're going to look at the background of Achille Mbembe. I'm always telling you that the background of these scholars gives you that enlightenment for you to understand why they are writing that way, what they are doing. So they are kind of influenced by their background. And he's an African. So we'll seek to understand why he speaks the way he speaks or he writes the way he writes. And you get to know that it's out of that experience that he has experienced also as an African has seen. So Achille Mbembe is one of Africa's most important contemporary philosophers. And then he's helped us to understand power, violence, and colonial legacy more than what Africa. He was born in Cameroon in 1957, the same year Ghana gained its independence. So his idea is to shape or has been shaped by Africa's what experience of colonization, independence, and post-colonial struggle. In terms of his educational background, he studied in Paris, and then he showed his grounding in European critical theories, yeah, which actually also helped him a lot. This part is important because you realize that he blends European thinking or thinkers like Foucault and Agamben with African's reality. And as we go or we espouse that, you get to understand why it is so. In terms of his career, currently he's a professor at Wits University, Johannesburg, South Africa, and then he has a visiting position at elite universities. He's visited the likes of Yale, Harvard, and Duke. He's not just an academic; he's a public intellectual, as I said earlier, and then he's written about Africa's place what in the world. In terms of his influence, as I said earlier, that he's been influenced by Foucault's biopower governmentality, Fanon's psychology of colonization, violence, and then Agamben's bare life and the state of exemption. So you realize that Mbembe extended them into the African context. So these particular thinkers, he extended their writing or their thinking into the African context, especially focusing on slavery, colonialism, apartheid, and then post-colonial conflict. Um, some of his major work is what I showed earlier in the pictures that we had over there, which was on the Postcolonial, which was in 2001. And he gave an analysis of Africa's politics after independence, and then the critique of black reasoning. He examined race, colonialism, and then global capitalism, which is also a very interesting book that when you read, you understand his perspective very well. And then Necropolitics, one of his also famous writings. Um, he was an essay in 2003 and then expanded in 2019. So that is one of his most famous concepts: how politics decide who must die. So that is it for Achille Mbembe in terms of his background. There's a lot about him, but in this video, that's what we're going to touch on in terms of his background, from his major works to his influence, who influenced him, to his career, to his education, and to who he is as a person. The core concept of necropolitics is it means the use of power to decide who may live and who must die. It is not just about regulating life, like how Foucault said, but it's about exposing people to death or creating conditions where their life or they live as well as if they are dead. You see, as Foucault gives us a picture of regulating life, Agamben tells us that it's not about just regulating life, no, but it's about exposing people to death, or a condition that has been created where the system creates a condition that makes you to live as if you are dead. And as I continue, you understand the context very well when the examples begin to come in. But put that at the back of your mind. And as we go, so the difference between or the difference from that of the biopower of Foucault. You see, Foucault biopower says that power regulates life, health, sexuality, productivity, and then what? Population control. Where, for example, vaccination campaign, census, school exams, where you are asked to write an examination. That is power in the hands of Foucault, because he feels that power is capillary, power is everywhere, and the fact that you may not feel you are being controlled, but your power is being influencing you, is making you do certain things, it's regulating you, because with that, because you want to pass the examination, you are giving yourself some time, you are learning, you are doing that. That's what Foucault talks about. But Mbembe's necropolitics says that power creates dead worlds, spaces where people are kept alive but stripped of rights, dignity, and protection. And then an example where he talks about, for example, we talk about a refugee camp. So you may find a refugee camp where people are there, they have no rights. You realize that they are there, they have no dignity, they have no protection. So in that instance, Mbembe is saying these people are more like in a living dead. There is a condition where that's been created, or a space that's been created, that allows them just to die. More like nobody cares about them. A war zone. He depicts that living dead like a war zone. You don't know when the next missile will fall. You don't know when the next person walks on your door and maybe you pull a gun. You don't know when the next food is coming from. That's what he talks about. More like that is the living that he describes. So whereas Foucault asks how power makes us live, Mbembe asks us how power makes us die. So in his idea of the dead world, he's referring to zones in which people exist as a living death. That one breath they are alive, but they are dead whilst they are walking on their life. So to give you a mental picture of this, you take more like the slave plantation, where people were enslaved, and enslaved Africans were treated as what, as property, or political rights. You are told what to do, when to sleep, what to work. It's like you have no right, you have no protection, you have nothing. The apartheid South African system where black communities um, were confined to a certain part, which was heavily policed. They were controlled. That is what he's talking about. You have no protection, you have no rights. That refugee camps you see of today, you see population traps in camp, controlled by without full rights. That is what he talks about in terms of his necropolitics. And the fourth one I would want to touch about is when he talks about as in politics is equal to life plus death. Because Mbembe argues that politics is not just about managing life, it's about also deciding who can be sacrificed, abandoned, or exposed to premature death. Example in today's world. Let's look at the armed conflict in DRC, where you have a whole population exposed to death through militants and then war economy. What do you see? People find themselves under maybe the rebels. You find even kids who are given guns to start engaging in violence at a very age with no choice. They are being sacrificed for that. People who are sent to fight for a cause, for 1 month's cause or desire of wealth. So they are exposed to premature death. These are people where tomorrow the militant groups can just come in, recruit these child soldiers, send them to a war front, give them gun, with sometimes not even no proper training, just basic training of how to handle the weapon. And definitely when they go, majority of them or some of them die. That is what he's talking about. That's what he's arguing. That it is also about deciding who can be sacrificed, who can be abandoned, who can be sacrificed is that the child of the militant, who is the head of the militant, will not have a gun going on the front line to go and fight because his life has been saved. The child of that woman or that husband who is maybe in the village may be taken away to go engage in that battle. So they're deciding who can be sacrificed, abandoned, or exposed to premature death. And even in the situation where Africans migrants crossing the Mediterranean, that's in some of this life are deemed what disposable. This is what Achille Mbembe is talking about. So, in a nutshell, for us to understand, necropolitics, I would say, is equal to power over death. It's not just life. It explains slavery, colonialism, apartheid, refugee camps, and modern war zones where people are reduced to living death. Now, to our next slide, necropolitics and the death world. I've mentioned some of these already, where the necropower and the death world. So the necropower is sovereign power exercised through violence. I've explained what necropolitics is. So the necropower is sovereign power exercised through violence, war, slavery, and occupation. Unlike biopower, which manages lives, necropower organizes what? Death and what? And suffering. Because it's about domination through the constant threat of death. For example, you have the colonial armies violating, controlling or violating or the colonial army violently what controlling what African territories, all sorts of brutal acts through the places which they were controlling, because they saw people, people were not giving rights, they were not giving protection. Slave masters on plantation deciding which slave will live or die. And you get also military occupations where civilians are exposed to violence daily. That is what Achille Mbembe is talking about when he said necropower. When it comes to the dead worlds, social spaces where people live as if already dead, excluded from full humanity. What we infer from this is that people are not fully alive politically or socially, only surviving biologically. So, in one breath, taking the slave plantation, when we see that the slaves are reduced to what? To social death, bodies as what? Properties. So somebody is deciding what the slave will do, what when they will sleep, when they have to work, and practically every part of their life. Socially, they are dead because their bodies are as what? As properties. During the apartheid township, we realize that black South Africans are confined, policed, and exposed to constant threats. And you find people in refugee camps in modern days, you realize that if these people are kept alive, they go to this, they are kept alive, all right, they have that, but they are stripped of what? Of rights. They cannot sometimes even move freely like other people move freely. There are some things they can't do. So they are stripped of rights, freedom, and what? And belongings. They don't own properties, they can't have any property, they can't own anything. And then the human condition in the dead world we are talking about is that people in these spaces they are controlled, they are disposable, and they are excluded. They are treated like a non-person. As I said, alive biologically, but they are politically what? Dead. Because politically they have no rights, they have no freedom, they have no protection. That's how it is. So looking at the, as I said earlier, African slave trade, you realize that Africans who were on the plantation, the Caribbeans or the Americans, their bodies were kept alive, right, to work, but socially they were dead. That is what we are referring to, or that is what we are talking about. So, in a nutshell, if under Mbembe, when we say necropower, when we say necropower, we are saying it's equal to domination through death, domination through death. And when we say the dead world, we are equating it to what? The spaces where people are kept alive but excluded from humanity. For example, the slave plantation to apartheid township and all refugee camps that we see today. This particular table you see in the slides is just giving us a view of having to situate the biopower of Foucault and then Achille Mbembe necropolitics, right? For you to get the context very well. And then I've already explained them in our subsequent slides as we are coming here, but this is just to give you a mental picture in the summary form for you to be able to situate it well, where Foucault explains power over life, which is the biopower, whilst Mbembe explains power over death, which is the necropolitics, right? So you see me giving you the target, as in Michel Foucault's biopower, the target, what it is about power or targets population and what embodies. The goal is to what is to make people what productive, healthy, and what and then disciplined. Example, having the census count for citizen, help allocate schools or hospitals. Whilst on a target when it comes to achieving Mbembe's necropolitics, we say Power targets what? Disposable groups, people seen as what? Unnecessary or dangerous. And then it creates what? Dead zones. So that apartheid system I spoke about, the refugee camps we're talking about, where people are controlled by a politically what? Dead. When we talk about the focus of them, you realize that Foucault's focus was that power is about regulating life, health, productivity, sexuality, as I've said earlier. So vaccination programs to manage what? Epidemic. While in Mbembe, when it comes to the focus, we talk about power is about what? Control through what? Death, violence, and terror. So the genocide in Rwanda, maybe Gaza's issue, and then slavery where people are kept alive only to die what? In labor. So that as a focus. And then I've also given examples in terms of that of what? The biopower, and that of also what? That of Achille Mbembe's necropolitics. This is just to help you have or think, just use a minute or some seconds to ponder over this, to situate that of Foucault's biopower and then necropolitics, so that you don't get confused and then you understand it from the perspective of what it is. That's why I have done this table, to simplify it for your understanding. Moving to the second slide, our next slide. We're now going to look at the key features of what? Necropolitics. The key features of what? Of necropolitics. Necropolitics. What are the things that when we see, we are able to identify that this is Achille Mbembe's necropolitics. And the first one is what? Sovereignty. Deciding life over death. Sovereignty. So in necropolitics, sovereignty means the power to decide who is allowed to live and who must die. And this is the sharpest form of political power. So you realize that during the Rwanda genocide in 1994, the state decided Tutu's lives were expendable, dead as politics. And when you have time to search around the genocide, you realize that there was an ethnic conflict where underlining politics were in play. It gives you, this is where you find to see necropolitics at work, where you find the state more like being complicit in terms of this particular genocide. Second point we want to look at is what? Okay, so in blurring of resistance and then suicide, which is also another second key point we're looking at. In necropolitical context, resistance and death can become what? Intertwined, where people may embrace martyrdom and then suicide or sacrifice as political act. So, for example, in Africa, the anti-colonial fighters often accepted likely death to inspire liberation movement. When you come to Ghana, realize that the death of the three service personnel who were shot on their way to the Christabel Castle led to revolution, led to the boycott of buying colonial goods and all these things. So sometimes some of these things becomes a trigger point or becomes something that is used in that particular regard. Then war machine. Necropolitics thrives in context of militants, rebel groups, and resource war. So these groups treat population as disposable. They use terror and then violence to maintain control. So example, rebel groups in the DRC, as I said, exploit what? Minerals, whilst what? Subjecting civilians to what? Death and what? And displacement. So even in the war of in the war of Liberia and then Sierra Leone, we had child soldiers. These people lived were reduced to what? Expendable tools of war. So these child soldiers were just used as a means for these people. That is what this another feature of necropolitics. And then the fourth one, we're going to look at colonial occupation and apartheid. So necropolitics also appeared in the form of what? Of colonial and then radical domination. So colonial powers what? Created space of what? Exclusion, surveillance, and then siege, where natives had no what real rights. As I said, in apartheid South Africa, townships were created more like dead worlds, where the black citizens were controlled, excluded, and exposed to political what or police violence. Colonial territories in Africa where Europeans live freely, but Africans live under what military what rule. These are some of the features of necropolitics. So the key points or what we've elaborated upon or spoken about is that necropolitics is marked by sovereignty over death, blurry lines between what resistance and sacrifice, the violence of war machine, and then the colonial or apartheid creation of dead worlds. And some of these I've already explained, I've already spoken about, which the African context, the examples I've given, and then we've seen them. I've spoken about the DLC. I've used them in explaining. So these are some of the examples that you can ponder over as you think about necropolitics. You try to find places where you can find some places where you think necropolitics has actually what happened. You have seen necropolitics what at play. These are some of the things that can situate and give you to put in perspective in terms of the African context. And also on the global context, you can look at some of these. The Guantánamo Bay detainees held outside law, living that they had no rights, they can't do anything. Their lives were decided for them when they will sleep, when they will wake up, and all those things. Refugee camps and then modern warfare in terms of drones, targeted killing, infrastructure war. There's what the Iraq, Kosovo, Russian-Ukraine war. All these are necropolitics fixed in this particular one, and it gives us understanding of the dead worlds that are being created, of the sovereign powers that are deciding who dies and who what lives, and creating exclusions and all this. So the global context also gives us what more understanding of what necropolitics or necropolitics comes in the context and necropower. So as I said, every theory always has criticisms. They are critique against every theory. So when it comes to Mbembe, some of the critics are saying that there's an overemphasis on on death. So Mbembe is being accused of focusing so much on death, war, and then domination that he underplays resistance, creativity, and survival. Right. So that is what sometimes he's being criticized for. And then these critics are also saying that we cannot only just say that Africans were being subdued, because African people also were not only just victims, because they also resisted. They built communities, and then they 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 express creativity even in that world. So those are some of the things that critics are also saying in terms of Achille Mbembe's necropolitics. And then the abstract language. Some criticism against him is that they say Mbembe's style is very theoretical and then sometimes difficult to apply to everyday politics. Like his idea of the dead world and then nuclear power, that they are powerful but can feel vague without concrete examples. That is what some critics also level against him. And then another critique against him also is they say he borrowed heavily from Foucault and then Agamben. That some say that Mbembe's originality lies less in creating new theories and more in applying European thinkers like Foucault's Biopower and Agamben's bare life to African context. But I would say, however, his strength is that the Africanism, or this helps to situate Africans' context, making them relevant to colonialism, slavery, and apartheid. That is my view in terms of that. So these are some of the critiques against him. So Mbembe is a brilliant and a very powerful contemporary scholar of our time. and one of influential ones on the African continent. But some will say controversial. And he's criticized for focusing too much on debt, using abstract language, and and then leaning so much on Foucault and then Agamben. But still, remember, he applies it to Africa's what context or Africa's application, making his work a very powerful contribution to what political theory. Why Mbembe matters? I'll tell you that there's been a shift focus from what managing life, which is biopower, to what organizing what debt, necropower. So I'm provided tools to analyze what colonialism, apartheid, genocide, and war economy, and help us out understand Africa's post-colonial conditions in global what context. This is what he has actually what given us and actually what educated us what in. We've spoken about a lot, so I won't have to rehash some of all these things he's spoken about. So using this more as a summary of what we've done today, what you realize is that the shift focus from managing life is of biopower to organizing death is just he stressing or moving from Foucault's focus on state regulation and management of life, which is the health, sexuality, and then this and then sexuality and then discipline. And then whilst Mbembe's necropolitics moves beyond that, as in politics is also about organizing death, deciding who lives and who dies. Yeah, that's what he means. He tells us. So it's like Mbembe remembers or reminds us that politics is not just about making life better, but also about deciding which lives are disposable. And then in terms of the tools for analyzing colonialism, apartheid, genocide, and then war economy. So when the tools for analyzing colonialism that he's helped us is that, you see, Mbembe give us a framework to help us understand the extreme form of what domination. So colonialism in terms of native population, what exclusion, exploitation, and exposure to what to death. That we spoke about the apartheid system, the township, which is equal to Death-World. It's run by the genocide, Rwanda's genocide in 1994, which is a systematic decision of who must die. Economic war, the DRC, South Sierra Leone, where civilians treated as what as disposable in what in resource what war. And the last part, why in Mbembe matters is that he has given us the African post-colonial condition in global context, because Mbembe has connected Africa's experience to the global patterns of power. So he has shown us how Africa's history of slavery, colonialism, and apartheid help us understand modern global politics, which is what the occupation, refugee crisis, and drone war. So these ideas helps us understand Africa's context better. So that is why Mbembe matters. Thank you very much for listening to this particular session. Kindly subscribe and then click and leave your comments. And also, you can watch other videos on our page. Thank you very much.